What's good, man? And welcome to yet another episode of Must Be Two Sides podcast. I'm your host, Lorenza, and this podcast will be dedicated to the top news stories of each month in the year that was 2017. Off top, January 20th, as a matter of fact, the inauguration of Donald Trump as freaking president of the United States of America. Now, that was crazy. A lot of us didn't see it coming. I remember that night in 2016, November, after the votes were tallied. I remember just sitting there thinking, "Wow, Hillary is definitely about to lose this." I remember being shocked. And then I remember saying, you know what? It could be worse. And turns out that it actually was worse, so to speak. So there we have it. Top story of January 2017. Donald Trump elected as president. Now, if you're thinking, damn, if you're going to do top news stories like that, then wow, we're probably going to get a lot of Trump in this. You may not, man. I won't kiss and tell, so to speak. February 2017. Now, we could go with one or two. Wait, you know what? I'd say I have about 4 or 5 things written down that happened in February. I have what happened at the Oscars with Moonlight Wins after the La La Land mix up. I have Mahershala Ali definitely winning an Oscar, but I would have to say that the Patriots beating the Falcons in the Super Bowl, especially after the Patriots were down 25 points with not much time left to go in the third quarter, that right there was probably the biggest story of 2017, and it will probably live on in infamy as one of the greatest comebacks in NFL history, much less Super Bowl history. Now, the next story, I guess, the next bit of news I guess I'd share. March, obviously. It's right after February, a lot of people think. But I'd say the London Bridge attack. They killed about, I'd say, 7 people and injured a hell of a lot more. That was probably the biggest story in March. Terrorism is always going to make the news, and when you see things like that, it just doesn't get any better. April. I guess the biggest news story in April had to be United Airlines dragging that man off the airplane. And if you haven't seen that shit before, man, I implore you, man, just look that up and watch it, man. Like, you can't make a lot of the stuff that happened in the news cycle of this year. You really can't make that shit up. So hopefully we leave a lot of this shit behind for the new year. But hey, here's hoping. In May 2017, President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. The reason why this is the top story in May of this past year is, it's a big deal because, FBI directors get fired all the time. It is nothing new. But how he was fired and the allegations as to why he was fired, it's what make this particular firing stand out. Now, there is a Russia investigation going on. After President Trump fired him, he had a meeting with Russian ambassadors, which, he basically said, or was alleged to say, that they finally got that guy out of there. It should be smooth sailing from here on out. So we still haven't really finished with that as a country. So we may be going back to that. We may visit that once again. June, the biggest story was the shooting that happened at the Congressional Republican baseball practice, in which Representative Steve Scalise and 3 others were shot, in which 2 officers basically saved the day. And Capitol Police, they basically saved the day. Now that was weird because this man drove so far. He drove a great distance just to carry out this act of terrorism. And this was another one of those forms of terrorism that really isn't called terrorism because of who the person looks like. July, July was really a slow news month. Of all the things I've pulled up to see what would be important in July, all I keep finding is things about Jupiter, which, you know, Jupiter has this great red spot that could be seen on the 12th of July. I don't know much about that. Don't care much about that because I'm not a space guy. I hate Star Wars. So I move on to August. August, what can we say about August, man? I used to say all the time that black people should be on alert in April, because April is Confederate History Month. It's Hitler's birthday. I think Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. It's just time for racism to hike up. But this time it happened in August with the Charlottesville White Nationalist March. Now, the president caught a lot of slack, and rightfully so, for how he reacted to it. A woman was killed there, had to hire. May God rest her soul. This was one of those times where we saw exactly what people didn't want to see over the past 8 years. You know, for the past 8 years, a lot of people were saying that we as Americans have moved on to a post-racial society. And with the election of President Trump, we've seen that we haven't moved on to a post-racial society. We've actually tried to hide the fact that we were still really, really racist. And Charlottesville was a definite sign of that. The NFL protests were a definite sign of that. How people felt about the NFL protests were definite signs of that. And I didn't put any of the shootings by police officers, I should say. Let me get that out. Shootings by police officers of unarmed people on the list because, you know, that's a story for another day. Now we move to the end of August and the beginning of September, which we had the hurricane season. You had Hurricane Harvey, and it was atrocious, man. Like, a lot of structural damage was done, and you saw what what's his name, J.J. Watt, was able to do with raising money. You saw the a quick response by President Trump and all of that good stuff. And, you know, then we went ahead and we had Hurricane Maria, and all the good response shit seemed to stop happening, man. It was definitely one of those times where we saw Hurricane Harvey gets this, Hurricane Harvey gets this, Hurricane Maria does not. Hurricane Irma was another hurricane that happened the same month. I guess it was definitely hurricane season. And we can't say enough about the responses that the U.S. made to Florida and Texas, and not point out the fact that when it happened to Puerto Rico, which belongs to America, that they didn't see the same kind of support that the states got. But Whatever will be, and we've moved past that. And now we're in October, and October, obviously, the biggest story was the act of terrorism of the Las Vegas concert shooting. 58 people killed, 500 others injured. Yo, you can't say enough about that. I think the guy had a bump stock rifle or whatnot, which allowed him to shoot multiple rounds at a rate that is unimaginable if you're firing at people. It was on some real Call of Duty shit, and you know, saying luckily we got past that. But it's time for us as a nation to, you know, maybe address some of these things, and hopefully we can be better. November, I guess we'd say that a picture, a Leonardo da Vinci painting, was sold at auction for $450 million. I don't have to explain that. Whoever bought that is definitely out here balling. And last but not least, December, the biggest story of this month was definitely Doug Jones, a Democrat, defeating a Republican senator in the state of Alabama for Senate. Stuff like that doesn't usually happen. Alabama is a red state through and through, and it lost a seat to a Democrat. Now, even though I'd say that he's more of a Dixiecrat than a Democrat, it was important to see Doug Jones beat a Republican for a Senate seat, even though that Republican was probably the worst candidate of all time. And that, my friends, have been the top news stories from January to December of 2017. I hope we don't have a repeat of the same kinds of stories in 2018, but with our president, global warming, the gun laws, so on and so forth. I do believe that we'll probably end up right around the same, but here's hope for something better, man. Peace.